We will move on to our fourth panel, which gets into surveillance systems, approaches, and strategies. And our speakers will begin with Tara Kelley-Baker, who's the principal research scientist at, I guess we call it NORC, not the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. And then we'll hear from Robert Voess, the senior research scientist at the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation. And lastly, from Jim Fell, who's the principal research scientist at NORC as well. So we'll begin with you, Tara.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're over there. Okay.
See if I can get this on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and hopefully we have your, yes.
Yes, and I have my clicker, and I'm going to have to wear my glasses because that's where I'm headed, is in age, with the glasses. So the three of us actually had the opportunity to coordinate our presentation, and I will be presenting on the data sources. Bob Voess over here will be presenting on the systems of programs currently in place, and then Jim is going to talk about the approaches. Obviously, we have limited time. And if you haven't already seen my presentation, it's loaded with text. And so I am a little embarrassed by how much text is on there, but I wanted to give you this information so that you could have it later on, and I would try to just highlight the key parts of each slide. So I guess I should formally introduce myself. I am Tara Kelley-Baker, and I am with NORC, is what we say. You know, NORC does rhyme with dork, so we do try to avoid that. And on our website, it says we like to go by NORC, but it used to be the National Opinion Research Center. Now we go by NORC at the University of Chicago. We're a nonprofit social science research firm. And in the spirit of transparency, I was with Pyre before I came to NORC, so we know each other here very well. So my presentation is a little unique from everything else that you've heard, because I'm going to share with you the data sources that myself and my colleagues have used. About 18 different data sources, dozen and a half. I'm not sitting here presenting the approaches or strategies or countermeasures that these data sources have evaluated, have been used to assess and so forth. Instead, I'm leaving you with this material so that you can go on this little thing called the internet and look at more information on these data sets. So like I said, there's about 18 data sets that I'll quickly go over. They can be categorized into state and local data sets, population surveys, and national data sources. Let me repeat, and I know I'm going to say this a lot, it is by no means exhaustive. In fact, last night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I thought of more, and this morning, talking to everybody, I thought of even more. So, you know, maybe I should just redo my presentation and add more. So let's start with the state and local level data. There's a number of data sets available here. I'm going to just list about 6 of them. Some are obviously more useful than others because of the type of data that are collected, or how the data is collected. The first one that I'll bring your attention to is DUI arrest and conviction data. Unfortunately, few data sets have DUI tracking systems. So, you know, linking the arrest, prosecution, adjudication, and sanctions, and acquiring these data sets from individual jurisdictions can be really quite challenging. Second, we have the DMV or MVA, that's Department of Motor Vehicles, or Motor Vehicle Association or Administration, excuse me. We do use these data sets a lot, but the states have varying systems, and so harmonizing that data is tremendously challenging. And some of the files get purged every 5 years, other files 20. So it really does make our job as a researchers using these data sets very, very difficult. And vehicle registration files. Now, I haven't personally used vehicle registration files. I'm interested in them. One of the things that I think is particularly interesting about them is they do have, they might be good to look at safety features that are of interest, but unfortunately, there's no alcohol measures on them. And so 3 others worth noting, police crash reports. So you've heard about some of the crash reports, California Switters, for example, that MJ talked about. These crash reports are generated by police officers, and they're good for assessing crash rates. But rarely, seldom, do we get BAC from them. And this is because if there is an alcohol measure, it's generally done through observation from the police officer. Emergency department and trauma center data. This is strong data, and it gives us information about the injury type, the reason for the injury. Sometimes, however, though, alcohol is underreported, and that's because of insurance issues. A lot of states are addressing this, but so that's one of the limitations with gathering emergency data and trauma data. Though I'm working with trauma centers now, and a lot of trauma centers are willing to work with researchers to acquire the kind of data that is needed for a particular study. And finally, there's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration Crash Outcome Data Evaluation System, known as CODES. CODES links motor vehicle crash reports and hospital records, and sometimes emergency medical service records, as well as death certificates. And it does have alcohol in the report. Unfortunately, CODES is only done for a select number of sites. I think there's about 7, or was about 7 of them, so it's not a huge number. All right, so next we have state and national population surveys. My colleagues here know all of these surveys. I'd be surprised if they didn't know all of these surveys. And there's plenty more. I'm only listing about 5 of them. These are the 5 main ones that I have used. And what I have done, and why there's a lot of text, is I've included the survey items so that you can see how varying they are from survey to survey, and why, again, harmonizing the data can be very challenging. So the first 2 worthy of noting are from CDC. There's the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System and the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System. Both of these are health surveys. Obviously, the youth one deals with a younger population. And then we have the NIAAA's National Epidemiological Survey on Alcohol and Related Conditions. We know it by NESARC. And so NESARC is a longitudinal study that specifically looks at alcohol and related consequences. So definitely a data set that we use a lot. And then there's NIDA's Monitoring the Future. So the Monitoring the Future study, or MTF survey, is conducted every year with about 50,000 high school students. And finally, I wanted to bring up SAMHSA's National Survey on Drug Use and Health, also known as NSDA. It is a cross-sectional survey about general drug use and health. And so this is, again, not an exhaustive list. Just wanted to show you the types of self-report surveys that are available, but more importantly, bring your attention to how the items are worded and how they vary. So next we have the national level data, and this is what I call our non-traffic specific data. The 2 worthy of noting are FBI statistics, and this is the Uniform Crime Report, which is often used as an enforcement measure in our research. And then there's the NIAAA per capita alcohol consumption measure. And this is generally, as you know, as many of you know, generated from alcohol sales taxes, and it's often used as a covariate in a lot of our research. Moving on to more national data, this is a bit more traffic specific, but these 2 that I'm bringing up don't have alcohol measures. They're often used as driving exposure measures. So both of them are through the Federal Highway Administration. VMT data is estimated generally through gas tax, and the National Household Travel Survey tracks all types of travel, not just vehicle travel. It can be bus, train, so forth. Both of these, also just regarding the travel survey, it's generally done every 4 years, sometimes more, and so sometimes in between years that has to be extrapolated. So one of the limitations, of course, of these data is there's nothing related to alcohol in these. But again, we use them as exposure measures. And finally, not finally, but finally, as far as some of the national level data, there's very traffic specific data that do include alcohol. One that we use a lot is the GES, the General Estimate System. And the GES provides an estimate of non-fatal and property damage crashes and statistics. The system began in 1988 and still continues. It's used to estimate how many motor vehicle crashes of different kinds take place, what happens, where they occur, and so forth. We use this, like I said, quite a bit, but the limitation of the GES is that it has alcohol as one of the variables, but it's underreported because they're based on the officer's observation. So it's not a BAC measure. Two data sets that I even put often use. So we do use the GES often, but we really use these a lot. And this is, some of you may have heard of FARS, the Fatality Analysis Report System. The FARS is a national data collection system that contains information on all known motor vehicle crashes, in which there was at least one fatality. And this system began in 1975 and goes to present. It is a good measure for alcohol because it has a BAC measure. This is really important to us traffic safety folks who are doing impaired driving research. And if it doesn't have a BAC in it, it has a strong imputation system so that we can use that. And then we also use, and this is where you're going to hear a lot more of my presentation, is the NHTSA's National Roadside Survey. So the National Roadside Survey has historically been used to estimate the prevalence of drinking driving in the U.S. road systems. But it also can be used to assess injury risk, injury and fatality risk that's related to impaired driving, typically alcohol. However, most recently, NHTSA has published a report on drug risk as well. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail there. Now, Jessica she stole my slide, but, but that's okay. She's entitled to. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about roadside. As Jessica said, it's been conducted for the last 5 decades. And Bob Vos over here actually led the first contract while he was at NHTSA. And I was fortunate to be a co-principal investigator on the last 2, the 2007 and 2013-14. So I'm intimately familiar with roadside surveys. These surveys are conducted randomly across the continuous 48 states. They are voluntary and anonymous surveys, and they're collected directly on the roads. So we get information immediately from the drivers. And not only do we get, information that's self-reported, where are they going? Where are they coming from? How often do they drink? How often do they drug? We also get biological measures, and this what really makes this data set wonderful for the impaired driving community. We administer a preliminary breath test, and so we are able to get a breath sample on the spot. And recently, we've administered oral fluid tests and blood tests so that we can get an indication of drug use. And again, this is data that's collected in time on our roads. These are they're pretty large studies. So the 2013-14 had about 10,000 drivers. They seem to be getting bigger across the decades, for sure. And again, that's 10,000 that were pulled in. The participation rates for, who provided a breath and who provided alcohol, who provided oral and blood vary. But those reports are all published and available on NHTSA's website. So this slide is, I'm not going to go over all the details, but I want to show you how important roadside surveys are. Because what they do is they give us information historically so that we can see the progress that we're making on our roads. So you can see that from 73 to 2013-14, the number of drivers on our roads who are alcohol positive has decreased. Not only can we see that happening because we have that data, but we can also we can dissect it by the level of BAC. So this information is pretty valuable. Also making it valuable is that we can we can overlap it with FARS. So keeping in mind that FARS is fatal drivers and NRS is, the live current people on our roads today, you can see how FARS closely, mirrors NRS. However, it seems that FARS was picking up that nothing was happening as far as fatalities back in '96, and we started seeing that in 2007, 2013, 14. There's actually no significant difference between 2007, 2013, 14, and the NRS. So again, just a nice way to show you why roadsides are valuable. And this slide is a little different than roadsides. This is a relative risk curve that was generated from a case control study conducted in Long Beach, California, and Fort Lauderdale. This study provides an estimate of the risk that from alcohol, and as you can see, it starts as early as 0.05, which has been discussed here. Reason why I really want to put this in the presentation is because if we don't have roadsides, we can't get this either. Because part of the case control studies is that we have to get control groups, and we use roadside surveys to collect the control groups. So and here's my soapbox. So unfortunately, the House of Representatives has recently prohibited funding for roadside surveys. And that's for their general use, but even more recently, they are wanting to add language that will get rid of any roadside or roadside-like surveys, which would be surveys that we use for case control studies. So I see this as being a real detriment, and even though they are completely voluntary and anonymous, some of our congressional folks feel that their constituents are being unduly coerced to participate. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. But again, my soapbox is let's not do away with roadside surveys. So before I go into, let me go into this, and I'm going to talk about a few other data sets that came to mind last night and this morning. We were asked to, by the committee, to give you our opinion, and by our I mean Bob and Jim, on what the perfect data source might be. And this was a pretty tough question. We kind of went back and forth. So we decided to break it down by future, more of the way future, and future intermediate, and then more immediate type of measures that could be done to improve the data sources that are currently available. So our dream data source, it would be having a black box on every vehicle with some kind of alcohol passive sensor, kind of the stuff you see in airplanes. So this would generate tremendous data on the crash and whether or not alcohol was involved. So if you're going to dream big. Why not? She gave us the opportunity. We put it up there. So more intermediate type of ideal data system might be a video audio recording. I don't really think I mean audio. I meant like GPS. So systems that can actually track and assess drivers' behaviors and look at the variables that are involved when a crash actually occurs. And this has been done in a study called SHARP, and I'll let my colleagues speak more about SHARP. But I believe SHARP is done. The study is done. It was done by Virginia Tech, and they've collected all the data, and the data is now available. But that kind of information is obviously very valuable. We also, but of course, if we're dreaming, and this is like us only half dreaming big, there's going to be challenges with privacy concerns if we ever try to do this. But we wanted to throw it up there. So more immediate type of measures that could be done to improve data sources might be, again, you'll hear it again, continue roadsides. For heaven's sakes, please continue roadsides. I think that we generate a lot of data through them, and I know that I've been really highlighting the data related to impaired driving, whether it be alcohol and drug, but we actually learn a lot about driving behavior in general. So even though I'm advocating it here because we're discussing impaired driving, I think that there are other ways we can use that data. The other thing that we would love to see happen is, since we do use the GES a lot, that to add an alcohol imputation system. FARS has that, and because FARS has that, you'll find that we publish a lot and do a lot of research using FARS. Also, codes. Codes is a really unique data system, but it's really in select sites, so maybe there's some possibilities of expanding that, greater coverage. And then the one thing that I think Jim and Bob and I all agreed on, and you've heard from MJ and you've heard from Rebecca at the last committee session, is including place of last drink polled in every police crash report when alcohol is suspected. So this item really includes valuable information on the consequences of alcohol distribution sales, especially over service sales and service to minors. So this item could be particularly useful, and we do know that it is currently done in the state of Washington, and it is recommended by NHTSA, NTSB, and NLEA. So I'm about to close off, but a couple of data systems that I wanted to also bring up as I was dreaming about them and as I was listening to folks today is, of course, I didn't list interlock data. Heavens, we use interlock data all the time. So interlock data is definitely valuable. You know, it's a heavy database. So you really have to have like amazing analysts and programmers to get through the data, but it's very valuable, especially in assessing interlocks. And of course, legal databases. We use legal databases from NCSL as well as APIS, which is funded by the NIAAA. That's the Alcohol Policy Information System. Both of those have been used a lot when we evaluate the policies. So I would be remiss in not mentioning those. The other thing that I have not heard a lot of discussion about today, and I do think is worthy of thinking more on and looking at what kind of data systems are out there to evaluate and impaired driving, is road system designs. So, my colleagues can talk a little bit more about this, and we might need to have engineers and so forth come in and discuss. But there has been, I know when I attended TRB this past winter, there was a really interesting presentation on signage and how the use of signs is, obviously important for all drivers, but how those signs are presented is different for impaired drivers. And so, I think that research in that direction might be really valuable. I also know that there's rumble pads. We have heard a little bit about that. And there's also, lane lines, how the width of lane lines and so forth. So those are other things that I don't have offhand data sources to list to you, but, I'll go back, redo my presentation, and send it to you. And that's it. I'll
Great.
hand
Thank
it
you,
over
Tara.
to Bob Bose.
Good.